that Europe is turning into a dictatorship. And these people are not, pro-Russians. They're anti-war. They don't want war. They don't see any benefit coming out of the war in Ukraine for Europe, for any European countries. What is your take, and particularly on the case of, Colonel Jackbo?
It's authoritarianism in the extreme form. It's the antithesis of democracy. I mean, the European Union is, running around lauding itself as, the last bastion of democracy, saying they're even better than the United States, and they have free speech. They have freedoms. It's the exact opposite. These are oppressive societies that suppress free speech across the board. These are, the European Union is this artificial construct that is the antithesis of sovereignty. It seeks to, bring to life a Frankenstein monster of, an amalgam of European nations and cultures that stand for nothing except oppression, because they don't have any fundamental values. They're there to empower. I mean, literally, the European Union exists to empower entitled political and economic elites. It was created by them, for them, on their behalf. That's it. They're not here to promote any values. They're not here to help, populations. They're there to enrich themselves and their supporters. And, the Ukraine war has become a vehicle of sustainment for these political and economic elites. And anybody who dares put forward a narrative, especially a fact-based narrative, drawn from European facts as opposed to Russian facts, as Jacques Baud has done. He simply uses the truth as recognized by the Europeans. There's not a single fact in his writing that is under dispute. It's just the way he connects the dots, exposes the lies and the hypocrisy of the European elite. And so they silenced him. Look, I was invited to go to Europe in March to promote my new book, which is being published in several European languages. I'm not going because, frankly speaking, they'll arrest me. And I just don't want to go through that harassment. I'm not afraid of these people, but, my daughter's giving birth to a baby. I want to be home for them instead of fighting some stupid legal case in a European court. Europe is a place that can't be visited right now. If you're an American, don't visit Europe because they don't believe in free speech. They don't have American values. They are the opposite of that. And right now they're turning on America. I mean, they are actively conspiring in a way that hurts the national security of the United States. Europe is the enemy. Donald Trump was right to point this out in his national security strategy. I mean, Europe is headed towards civilization erasure because there is no European civilization anymore. The European Union is not civilization. It's a dictatorship by any other name. They are working against our interests. They are promoting war. They are, breaking the law and reinventing the law, trying to steal sovereign wealth from Russia. There's no legal justification for anything they're doing. They just say it's good for Europe, and therefore they come up with different variations of a theme. Taxation without representation, just again promoting everything they claim not to stand for is what they're promoting. I can't go to Europe. I think you would have trouble going to Europe after some of the things that you platform me, so you're automatically guilty. You're going to go to hell. And it's just ridiculous. It's a parody. I mean, it's bad. They're so stupid that they think that we don't know history. They're reinventing the Second World War right now, pretending Russia simply didn't play a role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. I mean, Kelly Kalas is just a colossal embarrassment to humanity. She's just beyond it. The stupidity of her statements are beyond belief. You got Sikorsky, the Polish foreign minister, who wants to pretend that Poland is the friend of Ukraine. Study your damn history. I have. I know it better than you, apparently. I know that, for instance, Poland suppressed Western Ukrainian independence in the Polish-Ukrainian conflict from 1918 to 1919, and then during the Polish-Soviet conflict from 1919 to 1921, you destroyed Ukrainian independence. Poland hates Ukraine. Study the history of Poland. I'm not going to justify what the Ukrainians did in Volhynia in 1943. That cannot be justified. But understand there was deep resentment from the Ukrainian population about the arrogance and the elitism of the Poles, who treated the Ukrainians like utter crap, because Poland never believed in Ukraine, doesn't believe in Ukraine today. They just have been hijacked by these globalists, these European elites who buy into this fake notion of I think when it's all said and done, they start parsing through. Once the European Union collapses and the records are opened, you're going to find that the European Union as a construct was one of the most fundamentally corrupt institutions on the planet, because there is no checks and balances. They literally are a law unto themselves, and the people that are empowered by them politically do things. They're starting to look at the former foreign minister. I forget her. It begins with an M, Margarita or more. She's under investigation. Wait till Ursula von der Leyen, they open the books on her and see what she did and what they all do. We mock Ukraine for being the most corrupt place on earth, but corruption begets corruption, and the European Union is extraordinarily corrupt too. So this is a travesty. I mean, it's actually good that we see the truth about the European Union. So there's no nostalgia over Europe. This isn't your grandfather's Europe. This is a new Europe, a sick Europe, a diseased Europe, and a Europe that's fundamentally anti-American. And as an American, and I know there's people out there, Scott, you're a hypocrite. Hey, screw you. I don't care about you guys. What I care about is what's happening right now. I understand my history better than you do. Remember who stood up against the Iraq War, who called out the United States as, the perpetrator of an illegal war of aggression, who's standing up the United States today, accusing them of preparing to carry out a similar illegal war of aggression in Venezuela. So pound sand. I know my history and I know my role as a citizen, but I also know that my government is making an effort to undo the sins of the past by promoting peace with Russia. That's why we promulgated a national security strategy that doesn't define Russia as an enemy or adversary, but rather as an ally of stability, a force of stability, a partner for stability. Pretty amazing stuff. The two largest nuclear armed nations in the world, instead of posturing off against each other for potential nuclear annihilation, talking about normalization of relations, something everybody should want, except apparently the Europeans, who are pushing us towards nuclear Armageddon. And I take umbrage at that. So no, Europe is the enemy. Russia is the friend. And what they're doing to Jacques Baud is a travesty.
When you talk about Europe, do you draw a line between the people in Europe and the leadership in Europe? Or you see that the public opinion somehow was wrapped up in somehow in some sort of thick propaganda? That's why the public opinion is not that much critical of the leadership in Europe.
It's tough. Look, I know for a fact that there's Europeans right now who disagree with the policies of the European Union. There's Germans who disagree with the policies of what Germany's doing. There's French people who disagree with the policies of Macron, British who disagree with the policies of Starmer. I know that there's good people in Europe. So you don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush. But if you're German, understand this. You are an enemy state. I'm not making it up. It's in the United Nations Charter, Article 53, Article 107. Oh, Scott, it's outdated. No, it's not. It's still the law. They haven't amended the charter. Well, 1995, they passed a resolution by the General Assembly saying that it was moot, that these are good countries now. That was then. This is now. Nations change. And what we're seeing is Germany and Japan going back to the aggressive policies of the past. I mean, Germany literally could be taking pages out of Mein Kampf, Mertz, and reading them, just changing, updating it. It's the same thing. Militarization, Drag nach Osten. I want to remind people about Ostplan, Plan Ost. the systemic slaughtering of the Slavs. And listen to the way Merz talks about the Russians, the dehumanization of the Russians. So if you're German, understand this. You don't get a free pass at all. You have committed horrific sins in the course of the past century. Twice in a century and a half, you've taken the world to global conflict, killings hundreds of millions of people. And now you're getting ready to do it again. I'm sorry, I guess there are good Germans, but no. If you're a German right now and you understand your history, understanding the whitewashing of the Nazis that took place in the aftermath of the Second World War, understanding that Nazi war criminals were given a free pass by the United States, by the British, to be reabsorbed for the purpose of confronting the Soviet Union. I mean, you go to Plan Unthinkable, Winston Churchill's plan, crafted in the summer of 1945. Was going to bring 10 Nazi divisions back into active strength to join the American and British to launch an attack against the Soviets. We just put the stake through the heart of the Nazi beast, and we are literally talking about rehabilitating 10 divisions of Nazis. And after Nuremberg, we basically stopped prosecuting the generals, and we whitewashed them. We went through a whole process of just making them smell good, letting them rewrite their history. All the interesting German books that came out about, warfare during the Battle of Normandy and the fighting, the tank wars in Eastern Europe, ignoring the fact of the horrific crimes that the same generals who wrote these books committed against the populations of these occupied nations. Why did we whitewash them? Because we needed the Germans to stand up against the Russians. We needed to be able to recreate a German army. We didn't call it the Wehrmacht, we called it the Bundeswehr. German industry, all of these industrialists who should have been put up against the wall and shot, were allowed to live and thrive without punishment. And today they're the heart of the remilitarization of Germany. Germany, cleanse thyself and recognize that the sins of the past survive to haunt you today. And I would say this about all of Europe. All of Europe has to take a long, hard look because, gosh, the last time I checked, almost all of Europe was occupied by the Nazis, and every single one of these occupied states had collaborators who caved into the Nazis. And I would say that the European Union, the non-German members of the European Union, are collaborators with the resurrection of the Third Reich, called the Fourth Reich today. I'm not exaggerating, people. Read the frickin' statements. Scott, you're mad. Yeah, I'm angry. And you should be too. Everybody should be angry. Furious that we've forgotten everything we claimed we stood for. The United Nations was supposed to be about preventing the very conflicts that Europe is talking about promoting. Scott, Russia invaded Ukraine. Again, you show your ignorance. Russia didn't invade Ukraine. Ukraine invaded itself, threatening the Russian-speaking population. And from 2014 till 2022, Russia bent over backwards, literally. They could have slaughtered the Ukrainian army in 2015, surrounded into Bolshevik. But Putin didn't want to do that. Putin didn't want to take Ukrainian territory. Putin said that these areas should be part of Ukraine, but the Ukrainians need to respect the legitimate rights of the Russian-speaking population. Germany and France and the president of Ukraine said, okay, spare the lives of our soldiers, and we'll do all this. But now they admit it was a sham. They lied. Do you guys forget the lies that were told by the Germans, by Angela Merkel, by Francois Hollande, by Petro Poroshenko, saying, no, we will do this Minsk thing, but secretly saying, no, we're just buying time. We're never going to do it. And what were they buying time for? To rebuild the Ukrainian army to NATO standards, to be part of an expansive NATO presence that sought the strategic defeat of Russia, the collapse of Russia, the division of Russia. I mean, Calais Kalas is at least honest enough to say what her goals are, to break Russia up. It's always been the goal of these European elitists. And you sit there and say, well, the Russians are to blame. Guys, you're lucky the Russians are patient, because if Russia was the United States, we'd have already taken Europe off the map, because Europe deserves to be taken off the map for the things that they're doing. So, yeah, I'm a little angry, and I blame the European population. Guys, revolution. Okay? Revolution or be found guilty. There's no room for the good German of the 1930s and 40s. You know, the ones that simply went to work and did their job and paid their taxes, and they didn't get involved politically. They just, grew the food that was used to feed the Nazi military. They went to jobs to produce the equipment that sustained the Nazi military. All you European citizens today that go to work, earn a paycheck, and pay taxes, you're sustaining this. Why don't you take a lead from the farmers at least? Go out in the damn streets, spread shit all over the buildings of the French political elite, and just say you're not going to put up with it anymore. That's what a good European would do. But you're not doing that, are you?
Is Europe preparing to fight Russia in the aftermath in 2029, 2030? Here is, before going to the question, that my question, here is what the UK Chief of Defense said, Scott.
Russia's track record shows Putin's willingness to target neighbouring states, including their children and civilian populations. The Russian leadership has made clear that it wishes to challenge, limit, divide and ultimately destroy NATO. A new era for defence doesn't just mean our military and government stepping up, as we are. It means our whole nation stepping up. And to do that, we need to contribute to that national conversation and bring these issues into the mainstream, just as our allies in many countries.
Yeah. What are they cooking for the conflict in Ukraine? Do you see escalation, and how capable is the United Kingdom, for example, to go in that direction?
Well, they're led by this gentleman who has nothing but Jubilee medals on his chest. Okay, he's never seen combat. Doesn't know what combat is. I don't think he's deployed outside of the United Kingdom. He's been a rear echelon something forever. And yet he's sitting there talking the language of war. He has about as much credibility as my pinky. My pinky's been to more war than he has. So no. Understand that his presentation came simultaneously with the presentation of Blaise, the last name begins with an M, Georgian derivation. Grandfather was a horrible Nazi war criminal, Ukrainian, who committed horrific crimes, probably died, hopefully screaming and suffering in 1944 when the Russians carried out their counterattack, pushing the Nazi forces out of what's left of Belarus. But we don't know. Hopefully he's dead. Probably dead. Hopefully he died then. But, she survived. She claims she never knew him, but all that. But when you deal with the Ukrainian diaspora like I have, and you understand they never forget their past, and they celebrate their past. But, Blaise gave a presentation too the same day. Ask yourself, why is the defense chief and the intelligence chief, who are implementers of policy, they don't make policy. They don't make policy. So why are they out there making policy, suggesting policy? It's an information operation. Okay, the United Kingdom can't go to war against Russia. Literally, they can't. They've got nothing, zero. And Blaise runs an organization that does hybrid warfare. I mean, the hypocrisy of this woman, knowing what the British are doing today in Ukraine, knowing how the British have empowered the Ukrainian special forces and intelligence service to carry out acts of terrorism against Russia, and indeed now the world. The drone attack that took place in the Mediterranean, the British did that. The drone attacks that are taking place in the Black Sea, the British are doing that. The Russians know that. Operation Paperclip, or whatever the hell they called that, not a paperclip, the drone operation that took place in Ukraine in June, where they had trucks launch drones. British conceived operations sustained by the British. So she's sitting there saying the Russians are doing hybrid war. No, Blaise, you're doing hybrid warfare. But why are they talking? Because this is an information operation. This is about creating perceptions. And what are they trying to achieve? And again, I say this as an American who's fully aware of what the British are trying to do. They are desperate to stop Donald Trump from implementing his national security strategy. They are doing their best to keep Ukraine in the fight. They need Ukraine to be sustainable and viable through the midterm elections. They're trying to wait out Donald Trump, and they're actively putting their thumb on the scale of American domestic politics. I mean, we sit there and go, oh, the Russians did this, the Russians did. The Russians didn't do anything, we now know. But the British do. The Europeans are, as we speak. They're in here in the United States doling out money. They're in here buying political allies. And the goal is to generate enough opposition to Donald Trump so that his plans get stymied by a Democratic Congress, who will then once again repeat what happened the last term, seeking to impeach, paralyze Trump. That's what's happening here. The British aren't going to war with Russia because the British can't go to war with Russia. NATO can't. NATO is dissolving as we speak. Literally, it's breaking apart. It's fundamentally broken. They will never resurrect this beast. It will not be Lazarus, raised from the dead with the magic touch of Mark Rutte. NATO's finished. They're not trying to save NATO. They're using the perception of a resurrected NATO to create political momentum to get them through the summer of 2026, through the silly season of American politics, in hopes that they can perform a miracle and end up, paralyzing Donald Trump politically by empowering the Democrats to take control of at least, one house of Congress. That's what's happening here.
I think the whole plan right now for Europeans is to outlast, the Trump administration. They know that with the Trump administration, they cannot achieve what they have in their mind in terms of the continuation of the conflict. That was somehow, that was said by Zelensky yesterday. Here is what he said, Scott.
United States have their policy. They don't see us in NATO. For now. Everything in our lives is for now. Maybe the position will change in the future. Maybe somebody will come to realize that strong Ukrainian army strengthens NATO, not vice versa. Politicians change. Somebody lives, somebody dies. And it's life.
These words are not Zelensky's. I think.
No, they're British words. They're written by MI6. They're written by Blaze. We know who writes these words. He just threatened the American president. If I were the president of the United States, he'd be a dead man by now. I would have killed him. You don't get to threaten the president of the United States. Not that little punk ass dude. No. But, hopefully Trump is doing the right thing. And the right thing is to destroy this pathetic excuse of a human being, eliminate his corrupt regime, and get Ukraine on the track of never being able again to promote this kind of disarray globally. Because Ukraine is the single most destabilizing force in the world today, even more so than Israel. Because Ukraine is doing its best to create the conditions that could lead to a nuclear war. They're disruptive of arms control. They're disruptive of European security and stability. They're disruptive of global economics. I mean, because of Ukraine, the European Union is threatening to, unravel the entire system that's used to sustain trade amongst nations. For what? This pathetic little country of Western Ukrainian, governed by Western Ukrainian nationalists who exist only to kill people who aren't Western Ukrainian nationalists. Go back and read the statements made by Stepan Bandera in a Polish court after he was arrested and tried for the murder of a Polish prosecutor, when he talked about the willingness to commit millions of murders if it gives them a Western Ukrainian state. I mean, this is, extreme nationalism, and it exists today. Listen to what the Ukrainian nationalists are saying about, continuing this war, what they're willing to do. Look at how prevalent they're becoming now. This war has brought about a lot of radicalism, and we saw Azov go from a battalion to a regiment, to a brigade, to a corps, and to several corps now. I mean, they're literally about 1/3 of the Ukrainian military. The most loyal, fanatic fighters are located in these Nazi units that have become the heart and soul of the Ukrainian military. And people need to understand that when the Ukrainians lose, and they will lose, and when the Ukrainian military collapses, and they will collapse, Zelensky has hinted on this. There will be a civil war in Ukraine.